Hi everybody, welcome to the first lecture of this arrays playlist. Right, today we're going to talk about arrays. We're going to be covering what an array is, right? The basic terminologies that go with an array. Why should we use arrays, right? One begs the question, right? Why do we need to use arrays? Declaring and initializing arrays, accessing array elements, iterating through arrays, which is a very important concept, right? And the common mistakes to avoid, right? Once you get started with arrays, right? So basically, an array is a fundamental data structure used in various programming languages, and right, it is very essential for us to use arrays. Why? Because it helps us in organizing and manipulating data, right? So let us come to the first topic, that what is an array, right? What is an array, right? As I explained earlier, that it is a data structure, right? Now, what is a data structure? As the name suggests, that a data structure is a way to organize, collect, store data, right? So an array is one such data structure that stores a collection of elements of the same data type, right? So it becomes very unconventional when you mix all these data types and store into an array. I know that modern programming languages like Java, Python, they allow you to mix all sorts of data, but a very conventional method would be to say that an array is a collection of elements of the same data type. Right, now, what do I mean by same data type? Let's say I want an array of numbers, right? So I want to store 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50, right? Now this is an array of integer data type, right? Now let's say I want to store an array of names, right? So take Kevin as an example, maybe Leo, maybe Chris, right? Now this is an example of an array which holds string data type, right? Maybe I want to store a collection of characters, right? Let's say I call it grades, right? So I might say A and then B, and I would want a special character, maybe exclamation marks, right? uh, Maybe a minus sign, maybe an underscore sign, right? This is a collection of, or an array of characters, right? Now when you, let's say I want to mix all these data types into one, right? Maybe let's say I want to create an array called person array, right? So the name would be Leo. Let's say his height would be 5.7, right? And he lives in maybe Argentina, right? And his date of birth maybe 1988, right? So this is an array of mixed data type, right? These would be the conventional way to go about, and this particular one here would be an unconventional way, right? So this just explains you a bit about what an array is, right? Now coming to the next part, which is the terminology. Terminology, right? I'm gonna explain a few concepts here which are very tightly knitted or weaved with the array concepts, right? So the first one would be an element, right? most of you know what an element is, right? It is basically an individual data stored in the array. So in this case, 10 would be an element, Leo would be an element, the underscore symbol would be an element, right? 1988 would be an element, right? So these are all elements. So what is an element? It is an individual piece of data that is stored inside the array, and it could be of any data type, right? So the next thing which I want to discuss about, and something very important, is the index, right? So you might have heard that array is a zero indexed data structure, right? What does this mean, right? So what I mean by a zero index data structure is that, first of all, let us see what an index actually means, right? Let's say I have an array of numbers 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, right? Now an index in array terminology would be a numeric identifier assigned to each element, and it typically or always starts from 0, right? So the numeric value assigned to 10 would be 0, assigned to 20 would be 1, assigned to 30 would be 2, and so on, right? So an index basically is a numerical value. It is a numeric identifier, you can say, or a numeric ID assigned to each element. Assigned to each element. And one might ask the question that why is an index actually necessary, right? This will come to in a minute, because index you will be using it throughout your arrays, right? Whenever you would use arrays, you'd always use index, right? So we'll come back to that in a minute, right? The third thing I'd want to discuss is the size or length of an array, right? What is the size or length of the array, right? This, you might have guessed it already, that the size or length of the array is the number of elements stored inside the array. Stored inside the array, right? So in this case, n would be 5, right? 5 is the number of elements stored inside the array, and the indices would always range from 0 to n minus 1, right? So this is something about array terminologies, right? Now moving on to the next topic, which is why use arrays, right? This is a question that you might be thinking, right? So I just want to explore some practical applications of arrays in programming, right? So that this will give you a better understanding of why you'd actually want to use an array, right? So the first example which I could think of is storing collections of data. Collections of data, right? Let's say you have to store a collection or a list of student records, right? So assigning it to one variable would be very inefficient, or it'd be very impractical, we could say, right? So because you'd have to store, let's say, student one's marks, let's say 70, and then student 2 would be, let's say, 65. Like that, there might be n number of students, right? Student n would have, let's say, some x number marks, right? So this becomes very impractical to use in programming, right? And how do we solve this problem? We solve this using the array data structure, right? Now This data structure helps us in storing collections of data, and the data could be anything, right? As I explained earlier, it could be a mixed data type, or it could be same data types like integers, strings, floats, doubles, double, whatever you'd want to, right? So this is the first practical application of why we'd want to use arrays in programming, right? Second thing which I could think of is a little bit mathematical related, which is I would want to represent matrices and tables, right? This data structure helps me a lot while dealing with matrices or data tables, right? Which is basically the same thing. A matrix is just basically an n-dimensional array, right? What is a matrix? It is basically an n-dimensional array. We are just discussing about one-dimensional arrays right now, right? But we can deal with n-dimensional arrays, right? We could store a lot of data. We could store it in 2 by 2 arrays, or 3 by 3 arrays, or n cross n arrays, right? This is one of the most efficient ways to use arrays. Like if you want to represent your data in terms of matrices or tables, then you'd use arrays, right? The second thing would be, well, I think one of the most important one is basically grouping related data, right? As I mentioned earlier, it could be records, it could be marks, it could be names, it could be addresses, etc. All right. Now I want to discuss about declaring and initializing arrays. Declaring and initializing arrays, right? How would one go about to declare and initialize arrays, right? So I'd give you a simple C code, and whatever language you'd use, just please look it up on Google, or you have Chat GPT nowadays, so please do look it up. But I'll give you a basic or a generic way to write or declare, I should say, arrays and initialize them as well, right? So first we'll go on about declaring arrays, right? And I do this using the C programming, right? So first I would declare my data type, right? What is the data type I'd want to store my array in? Like whether it would be an integer, or whether it would be a float, or whether it would be a string, a character, etc., right? And then I'd go about saying what my name of the array would be. That would be my variable name, right? And then I'd open a square brace and specify the size of the array, and then a semicolon. This is how I'd go about declaring, an array in C, right? So if I had to declare, let's say, an integer array called numbers of size 5, then I'll do it like this, right? Now coming to the initialization part, right? How would I initialize arrays, right? So after declaring the array, I would just say that, listen, I want to create an integer array called numbers with size 5, right? And I'd assign this to, let's say, a list of numbers. Let's say I'd want to store 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50. So you just give an equal to sign, and then open a square brace, assign your numbers, right? It would be comma separated, and then you'd close the brace and put a semicolon. This is how you would go about initializing an array in C. Alright, so I think this covers some of the most basic topics. Right, now let us move to one of the most fundamental topics, which is accessing array elements. Accessing array elements. Right, now how would I access elements? Right, I've done the job of creating an array. I've done a job of initializing and declaring an array. Right, I've learned that okay, why I'd want to use an array structure, and I found a practical reason to declare and initialize an array. But now one begs the question that what would I do with this array? Right, and the first thing that comes into mind is I'd want to access a particular record, and how would I go about doing that? Right, so as we learned earlier, we would use something called as an index. Right, now what is an index? It is a numerical value associated with each element inside the array, and here we're mostly going to discuss zero indexed arrays. Right, that the numerical value would be would start from 0 and then go up till n minus 1, where n is the size of the array. Right, so the start would be 0, the end would be n minus 1, and the size of the array would be n. Right, so now I'll just give you a generic syntax on how I would go about accessing array elements. Let's say I will take an array of names. Right, and let's say this has Kevin, Leo, Chris, and then let's say Francis. Right, and the values that I'd associated with them, or the index I should say, is 0, 1, 2, 3, and you see n is equals to 4. Right, now let's say I want to access an element at index 2. Right, how do I go? So if I want to access an element present at index 2, first I'd have to specify the variable name, or let me just make this more generic and say you'd first initialize the array name and then you'd specify the index, and this here will give you the element present at index I. Right, so let's say here I have to access an element at index 2. Now what is my array name? My array name is names, and what is the index? Index is 2. What will this give me? This will give me Chris. Right, so this is how you would basically access an array element. Right, now if I give you an index, you'd be able to access any element present at that particular index, right, in that given array. Right, now let us move on to a very very important and one of the most fundamental topics in arrays, that is its iterating property. Iterating through arrays. Right, and let me just take a quick example. Let's say I'd have a marks array which has 80, 65, 30, 75, 90 and 57. Right, and this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? And n is equals to 6, where n is the size of the array, and this is the array name, right? The start index would be 0, the end index would be n minus 1, which is 6 minus 1, which is 5, right? You can see here the end index is 5, right? Now, why would I want to iterate through arrays, right? The two reasons why I'd want to iterate over arrays would be data processing or data manipulation. Data manipulation, right? Maybe I'd want to find an element, or maybe I'd want to print an element, right? Or maybe I'd want to change an element, or maybe add elements, maybe remove them, right? So these are the two major reasons why I'd iterate over arrays. And how can we go about iterating over arrays, right? Now, you'd all know the concept of loops, right? Whether it be a for loop, a while loop, or a do while loop, right? Now, these are some of the ways which we can iterate over loops, right? I would be discussing about for and while because I don't know anybody who uses the do while loop, but for me, in this lecture we'd go about using the for and the while loop, right? So let us see how we can use loops to manipulate or process data using arrays, right? So first example would be for loop, right? Let's say I have marks. Just give me a second. I will copy this part here. Drop it down. Right. Okay. Now, right, how do I iterate over an array? Let's say marks here. So what I do is I start with for I is equals to 0. Why 0? Because of course 0 index array, right? And I'd go till I less than n, which means that this will hold good from I is equals to 0 to I less than or equal to n minus 1, right? So this condition holds through for I is equals to 0 to I less than or equal to n minus 1, right? Now, then I'd increment it by 1. Why? Because I just want to access all the elements present inside the array, and in this case let us just consider that we'd want to just print the array elements, right? So I just say print marks of I, where I is my index, right? Now let us trace through this program, right? Let's say the loop starts, I is equals to 0, comes inside, right? What does it print? It prints marks of 0. What is marks of 0? 80. Now I becomes 1 because I plus plus happens, right? Is I less than n, which is I less than 1 less than 6, sorry, yes, 1 is less than 6, comes inside the loop, prints marks of I. What is marks of 1? It's 65. Goes to I is equals to 2, prints 30. Goes to I is equals to 3, prints 75. Goes to I is equals to 4, prints 90. Goes to I is equals to 5, prints 57. And then I will become 6, right? Because it, when I reaches 5, it goes one more time, checks here, I is initialized to 6, and then it checks if 6 is less than 6. Is 6 less than 6? False. It breaks out of the loop, right? And the result you would get is this part here. You have successfully printed all the elements of the marks array, right? And this basically covers how I'd go about iterating through an array in for loop, right? Now let us do the same for while loop, right? So how does while loop work? While loop works where initialization happens first, and then comes your condition, conditional checking, and then comes your increment / decrement, right? So let's say I take a variable I, because that's one of the most generic variable names used throughout programming when dealing with loops, right? So this becomes my initialization, right? This becomes my step number 1, right? And then what is my step number 2? It is adding a conditional check, right? And I have to specify which loop I'm using, which is the while loop, right? And then I give the condition saying I less than n, where n is the size of the array, size of array, right? And then what did I want to do? I'd want to just print marks of I, and then this becomes my second step, right? Second step. And then I cannot miss my third step because that is my increment or decrement section. Here, since I'd like to traverse through all the array elements, I would do I plus plus, and this becomes my third step. And we have successfully written a while loop to print all the elements in the marks array, right? Now coming to the last topic which I'd like to discuss is the common mistakes. Common mistakes. Let me just write it in red. Red. Oh my god, I have forgotten how to spell. Okay. Common mistakes that a programmer does while dealing with arrays, right? Now there are a lot of potential errors and challenges we face when working with the array data structure, right? And what are some of those? The first one which you would always face is the index out of bounds error. Bounds error, right? And this error is actually a pain in the ass, right? I'll give you an example. Let's say I have an array whose name is ARR, and let's say I'd want to store some float value this time, 8.5, 2.8, 9.3, 6.7, 8.2. Alright. Now, what does array index out of bounds error mean? It means that you are trying to access an element, right? In this case, access. Why? Because we've just discussed about accessing, but there might be several reasons why an index out of bounds error exists. But since we have only covered accessing elements, right? I'm just going to discuss about that. Right. So there are multiple reasons to why index out of bounds error exists. Sorry, there are multiple reasons why the index out of bounds error might arise in code, but today we'll just be talking about why it occurs because of accessing. Right. Now, why does it occur? Right. As I said earlier, that since array is a zero indexed data structure, right, its start point would be 0 and its end point would be n minus 1, right? If you try to access an element which exists outside of the start and end point, you will always get out of bounds. Alright, now how do you get out of bounds in this case? Let's say I'd want to access an array element present at -1 index, or I'd want to access an element present at, let's say, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 at 5 index. These indexes never exist, and yet you try to access them. That's why you get these errors, right? So what would be your inclusivity when accessing arrays, right? Your range would lie from 0 to n minus 1, and anything which is less than 0 or greater than or equal to n would give you the index out of bounds error, right? So this is just an overview of one of the most common mistakes made while dealing with the array data structure, right? The second one is simple, but still we do fall into this trap, is we forget to check if an array is empty or not, right? Let's try this here. Not, right? Now what do I mean by this? Let's say you have an array called marks, right? And this is an empty array. You've just declared it. You have not initialized it with any variables. It has been initialized as an empty array, right? Now, if you start iterating over an empty array, you're going to invite all sorts of errors in your code, right? So it is very important, very important, I'd say, to check if your array contains elements or not, right? Elements or not. And based on this check, I'd say you should go about iterating through your array or even accessing elements, right? So I think, yeah guys, this would be the end of this lecture, right? Just to summarize what we have gone through, we discussed what an array is, right? It is a data structure, right? What are the terminologies um, used in an array, right? We discussed three things which are very important. One is the element, one is the index, right? You can never ever forget about the index, right? And the third one would be the size or length of the array, right? And then we discussed some applications of why would you want to use an array, right? Why do you want to use an array? Some general or practical applications in programming, right? And then we declared we uh, learned about how to declare and initialize an array, right? And then we discussed something very important, which is accessing array elements. How do you access them? You access them based on index, right? And then we discussed iterating through arrays, right? And why do we want to iterate through arrays, right? We discussed two important things, which is data processing and data manipulations, right? And then something which all humans do is make mistakes, and that was our last part, which was the common mistakes to avoid when dealing with errors, right? One was the index out of bounds error. In this class, I've just used the example of accessing elements, right? So if it is less than 0 or if it is greater than or equal to 1, it causes that error, right? So this was one of the examples. The second one which I wanted to explain, which I explained actually, was the null check error, right? Checking if your array is empty or not, and then deciding whether to iterate through the array, right? So I think that's all, guys. In the next lecture, we'll be discussing, I think, a bit of algorithms more, right? How to insert into an array, or how to delete from an array, how to insert at specific positions, right? How to append into an array. I think we'll be doing a lot of fun stuff, right? Thank you so much.